readers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire Books, and I just want to record a review of Matrix by Lauren Groff. I'm pretty sure most people are pronouncing it Matrix. I'm a Latin teacher. You're just going to bear with me. So in Latin, a matrix, and I'm sure that we're looking at Latin definitions and not sci-fi because this is a novel about 12th century nuns, is a womb, a uterus, or it can be like a mother, but with respect to like breeding animals. It's not used for human women. But matrix is typically used to refer to the womb and sometimes to Eve, the progenitor of all humankind. So why Matrix as a title? Because this is a book that's all about women and the things that they build and the things that they try to keep in the world during and after their own lives. So the main character of this book is Marie. She's been banished from the court of Eleanor of Aquitaine, and she's been sent out to this dumpy abbey in like the furthest reaches of England. It's terrible, and this has happened to her because she is both really unfit for court life. So she's really tall, she's really gangly, she's very not graceful. And the other issue is that not only is she ungraceful, but she's very unsubtly romantically in love with Queen Eleanor. And so instead of them trying to marry her off to a man, they send her off to a nunnery where she is the unwilling prioress, and that is where our story starts. So the novel basically tracks Marie's life, beginning with her exile from court and going all the way up to the end of her life. And it follows her as a prioress of this nunnery that is just in shambles, and it takes us up through her career as an abbess of that same nunnery. But I would say that what really makes this book interesting is not so much the plot, which, you know, it's not a super tightly plotted novel. It's really more about scenes and the way they make you feel, insights that Marie has throughout her time in the nunnery, and these larger themes about womanhood and the importance of women and their ambition and what they can create. So I think the most important takeaway of this book in terms of modern theming is that throughout this novel, we really get this impression of Marie as somebody who understands that she is a special person who is talented and who can achieve a lot. And so her early time in the nunnery is very much about her frustration, I think, at feeling taken out of the world. She feels that she's been sort of taken out of play, and her pain under those circumstances is, I think, really, really understandable. The only real touchstone, so Marie is a historical person, but we don't know a lot about her. So the only real historical touchstone in the book is this set of poems that she writes and that she sends back to court. And in this novel, she's writing them as a way of trying to get herself removed from this convent, which of course doesn't happen, but she's seeing herself as an author, as someone who is a creator, as somebody who is worth having around, not because of her marriage prospects, but because she has talent. And of course, she eventually decides to turn those talents to improving the state of the convent, and that's a good thing because everyone there is starving to death. It's a mess. The renters have not been paying their rent to the nuns for years and years and years, and it's, you know, people are dying, there are starving children that are being sent to this nunnery. So Marie really does have her work cut out for her. And greatness comes in again in this respect because it's not enough for her to have nuns who are healthy and well-fed and a convent that is financially set. She needs more. And so throughout the book, she starts discussing her visions of the Virgin Mary, which are described in great detail throughout the novel. And she uses them to justify these increasingly ambitious building projects and also spiritual decisions that she makes as the abbess of this convent. And I think that in some ways is where this book really gets interesting, because I think everybody can cheer for Marie being like, yeah, you go, you help those nuns eat and you make a good business out of their, you know, scriptorium. And, you know, you tell that diocesan who comes and tries to control the nunnery to go away. And I think that all of us like a little bit of like a 12th century nun girl boss in our literature. But Marie doesn't stop there. And that's where I think this novel is really doing a lot that's very interesting, because as she gets more ambitious, she is really pushing her understanding of the ways that things should be. And this is over the will of people that she likes and respects who serve her in this convent. And then eventually she starts not only to kind of push their ideas about practicality, but their ideas about what's right in terms of religion and in terms of social relationships to men. At one point, she decides that she should be the one who takes confession, not a male visitor who can take the confession of the nuns. And this is both a religious crisis, because this is not considered proper in this time period, but it's also a real ethical issue, because she sees herself as being a woman taking the confessions of women, and she sees what she does as good. But there's also a lot of issues with her sort of crossing the line and taking maybe a little too much control and knowing a little bit too much about the inner lives of the women who serve her, who work under her, and who have to do what she says. So I really like this idea of greatness as something that's problematic. And like, Marie knows it's a problem. She at various times renounces her ambition, and then it comes back and she just cannot help herself. And I loved this for her because it made her less of an obvious good character all the way through, because that would be boring. But I also think that it was a beautiful expression of women's need to matter in all historical time periods. You know, we talk a lot about women now having careers and having goals and wanting to leave their mark on the world, but just because we don't hear as much about it from earlier centuries, that doesn't mean it didn't happen and that women didn't feel it. And I think that giving Marie those needs and that hunger, that drive, really makes this book something special. And the other thing that's really cool about it is in this context, you know, this is really a book about women. All of the men that appear in this book are tangential. There are no male main characters. I'm not even sure there are any named male characters. She doesn't name men. She doesn't talk about men. She doesn't think about what they want. Basically, Marie spends her time like keeping men away from her convent and focusing on the women inside. And so that also means that all of the political battles, all of the little skirmishes about who's the most spiritual, all of the project design for things that Marie wants to build around this convent, all of these things are driven by women. And I think that that is so cool, because it was just really nice to like see this universe where women could want to do things and make them happen, and where women were the ones who had the skills to bring things about, and where women were having disagreements about where they as a community should go without input from guys. And like, is that super accurate for 12th century Europe? I mean, probably not, but we can dream. And I actually liked that the conflicts that arose from doing this really were in line with, I think, historically what things would have been if this story had actually taken place. So, you know, people's discomfort about social change, even if they are women, even if Marie thinks something is empowering, not all the women around her agree. And she does start to kind of get into political trouble for the things that she does. She also rationalizes what she's doing using vocabulary and imagery that would have been available to an actual person in this time period. And I think that's what I really appreciated the most about Groff's work on like a finer level. You can tell that she's really been looking at life in this time period and looking at texts that they would have had access to and trying to think about how she can recast scripture through the point of view of a nun in a way that's going to make these interpretations work. So more on that in a second, but the other thing that is a natural consequence of having a book that's entirely about women is that, of course, people fall in love, they have romantic relationships, and so all of the relationships in this book are more or less furtive romances between women, or at least physical relationships between women. And it's also really interesting to see that play out. Some of the women need to kind of justify their physical needs as maybe an illness, something that needs to be taken care of at the infirmary. While other women are more open about kind of stealing kisses from each other and having something that's much more of a traditional romance. And, you know, Marie herself is kind of involved in a courtly romance throughout the entire novel, because she maintains her obsession with Eleanor of Aquitaine for her entire life. And so, you know, she is very knightly in the very first scene of the book. And, you know, this idea of chivalrous love, this impossible love, is something that comes up again and again and again throughout the novel. And what's interesting is that Eleanor is aware of Marie's affection, and they kind of touch base again later and correspond. And it is very interesting to see them interact, because the way that they try to have some sort of relationship really reflects like the need for there to be distance between them, that strange sort of courtly obsession, while also Marie is becoming a force in her own right, with or without Eleanor. So it's just really interesting to see relationships play out in this book, and, the way that people meet their needs in their lives in a life that's absent of men. So the other thing that I thought was really fascinating about this book generally is just, I think that Lauren Groff's visions that she writes for Marie are going to warrant further interpretation over time. I, as a biblical scholar, so I have a PhD in ancient Christianity. I wrote my dissertation about Coptic monasticism. I was very interested in what she was putting into Marie's visions. So I really enjoyed the embrace of Mary Magdalene, not as Jesus' wife, because we don't do men in this book. Instead, she is Apostola Apostolorum, the apostle of the apostles. And she is, as depicted in the Gospels, the first person to see the risen Christ and to deliver his message and his good news to the other apostles who were men. So this idea of, having Mary Magdalene as a prominent saint who's depicted in this convent was really, really neat. And then Marie's actual visions were fascinating. She has visions where Eve and the Virgin Mary are actually a team, and they, work together to represent perfect womanhood. She has a vision of God as a hen laying eggs. She did something really cool where she kind of makes an argument for the primacy of women over men, but going back to the story of Adam and Eve. So check this out. She is having a vision, right? So she sees a woman of equal radiance to the Virgin Mary. This is Eve, cloaked in the red of blood, with diamonds and silver upon her neck and wrists. And upon her brow was shining in rubies the wound made by the staff of the angel who chased her from the first garden. For this was Eve, the first mother of all humankind. And she held in her other hand a rib made of crystal, for she herself had been molded from a rib, and so proved herself a refinement of the first mortal made of mere clay. For is not gold pulled from the rock less perfect than gold that is melted from the rock by handiwork and annealed to a shine that echoes that of the sun? So basically, a lot of arguments for patriarchy include Adam being the first human and Eve just coming from his rib. This idea of Eve as a refinement of Adam is just fascinating, and I was really here for it in this novel. There's also a really strange vision here that I had questions about. Like, if I had the poll to get an author interview, I would want to talk about this, because she is imagining the nuns being attacked by beasts from Revelation. But what's interesting is that the beasts that she chooses are beasts that actually are not monsters. They're often depicted as the Gospels. So the eagle, the bull, the human, and the lion. And they're all turned into female creatures, but they're put as like threatening and on the attack. And it's like, okay, is Marie rejecting the Gospels here? Is she rejecting the church and its reading of the Gospels here? Like, what does she see as a threat? And, I might go back and read that part a few more times just to try to get at what Groff was saying, because I was really fascinated by this sort of push at biblical interpretation, and I would really like to know more about what went into that vision and the intentions behind writing it for Marie. There are also lots of interesting little references to Marie's classical education, which I appreciated very much as a current Latin teacher. So if you are into kind of weird Easter eggs of biblical interpretation, this book will have like a different level of enjoyment for you. So how do I feel about this book in the end? I'm not sure that I loved it on an emotional level. Like, books that I tend to love the best really impact me in the heart. They feel like just an arrow to my torso, and they emotionally wreck me for days after I read them. So Matrix is not a book that's going to do that. It is, however, a book that really made me think a lot, and I really appreciated it in that respect. It was a really interesting meditation on female power and on the ambitions that women have and what they can build, and the fact that those ambitions are just as dangerous in women as they are in men. Marie loses friendships, and she does really questionable things throughout her career in an attempt to realize her own vision and her own goals. It was also a really interesting meditation on relationships and obsession and what it is to love another person in a healthy way versus an unhealthy one within a context where nobody's supposed to be loving at all. And I think it's also a really neat story about someone realizing that they are stuck in a place and truly making the best of it, because Marie also really has an emotional journey where she goes from absolutely hating the place where she is to, really maybe developing more of a spiritual life, maybe becoming more of a believer. That's actually something that's not completely clear from this novel. It's not totally clear if she truly has a deep faith by the time of her death, or if she's just kind of faked it to get what she wants. And that really intrigued me. It's the kind of thing that keeps me coming back to a book again and again. So this is going to be a book that I keep in my collection. I think I'm going to revisit it at some point in the future. And it is just such a cool take on Christian imagery and on the role of women in the world, all done through this medieval nunnery lens. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, I highly recommend Matrix by Lauren Groff. Happy reading!